The new Canadian Prime Minister is a tough economist and a former governor of the Bank of England. But Mark Carney has never held a political seat. He vows to stand up to President Trump and win Canada's trade war with the US. But without political experience, can Carney really succeed? Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. Now, the new Canadian Prime Minister has vowed Canada will never, ever be a part of America in response to Donald Trump's threat to make it the 51st state. It's strong words from a man new to politics. So can Mark Carney really protect Canada from Trump?
In first place, the next Prime Minister of Canada, Mark Carney.
The man who will lead Canada, succeeding Justin Trudeau. Last July, a poll found that 93% of Canadians didn't know who Mark Carney was. So who is he? Carney was born in West Canada, studying at Harvard and Oxford before making a fortune working in global cities for Goldman Sachs. Carney went on to govern the central banks of two major economies, in Canada during the 2008 financial crisis and here in London at the Bank of England. He was the first non-British person to govern the bank, and he guided the UK through a turbulent time after Brexit. This economic experience, it was thought, helped him win the Liberal Party's leadership contest with a remarkable 86% of the vote, making him the new Canadian Prime Minister. And will immediately be put to the test in response to Donald Trump's trade war.
In many respects, part of my experience overlaps with that of the president. We'll both be looking out for our countries, but he knows, and I know from long experience, that we can find mutual solutions that win for both.
The US President Donald Trump said Canada could avoid tariffs if it joins the United States of America and becomes its 51st state.
If we make it in the United States, we don't need it to be made in Canada. We'll have the jobs. That's why Canada should be our 51st state.
In response to this threat, Carney had fighting words.
We will never, ever, in any way, shape, or form, be part of the United States. America is not Canada. I, Mark Carney, do solemnly and sincerely promise.
Since Trump took office, the Liberal Party's popularity has surged in the polls, surpassing the Conservative Party. With Carney expected to call a general election soon, can he continue to ride this wave of popularity and win the Trump trade war?
Let's bring in our guests. Joining me in the studio, we have Adam Boulton. He is the political journalist and broadcaster. In Santa Teresa, Costa Rica, we have Tony Chapman. He's the Canadian host of the award-winning podcast Chatter That Matters and founder of Chatter AI. And in London, we have Vicky Pryce, who's the Chief Economic Advisor at the Centre for Economics and Business Research. Tony, to you, first of all, does it matter that Canada's new leader is not a politician?
I think there's a lot of concern around that, but there's a lot of joy in the fact that Justin Trudeau is gone. I think after 10 years and seeing Canada's standard of living spiral and our debt increase, people were absolutely desperate for change. They were hoping for an election, but instead Justin Trudeau resigned, and then sort of what we saw was the apparent coronation of Mark Carney. It was sort of a uncontested leadership, and Carney's been very attached to the Liberals, so it'll be interesting to see how it plays out, whether he's going to try to distance himself from the past regime or embrace it.
He's had quite a rapid rise, really. I mean, do Canadians even know who he is?
Not at all, but Canadians in general have a tendency to vote based on name recognition versus necessarily policy. They get quite enchanted by ideology. They quickly forget the past record in the hope that in the future, there's going to be what I always call more free prizes inside when we go to a ballot box. So I'm not sure that the average Canadian is really looking at resumes. They're much more interested in does that person look the part? Does that person look like he can carry us as our Prime Minister?
Adam, you've known Carney over the years from his time in London. He was governor of the Bank of England, famously. Your impression of him?
Well, this is a moment of crisis for Canada because we have to remember it's not just the imposition of economic tariffs and sanctions, but also Donald Trump repeatedly saying he wants to turn Canada into the 51st state. So it's extraordinary times by any definition, I think, in Canadian politics. And in that sense, I think the first point to make is by not being a known politician in Canada, although he was, of course, the governor of the Bank of England, that could actually be an asset. And he has distanced himself to a certain extent from the Trudeau administration, not signed up necessarily to all Trudeau's policies. And then the second point to make is he may not be a politician, but he has been involved in international politics for a very long time. He was at the Bank of Canada at the time of the Great Recession, and arguably Canada, partly through his policies, recovered more quickly than other countries then. And then, of course, he was at the Bank of England through Brexit. And, you know, heads of banks, bank chiefs do talk to international leaders at those moments of crisis. So he knows his way around. He's met Donald Trump before. And what he appears to have done is not only win this absolutely massive victory in his own party, you know, elected by whatever it was, 89% of the party, which I've covered a lot of leadership elections. That's pretty good.
It's up there with Putin.
But he's also appears, for the time being, to have pulled the Liberal Party up quite significantly in the opinion polls to the point that they have a shout, whereas as we're just hearing under Justin Trudeau, they were on course to lose the election. So, you know, so far so good. It's gone pretty remarkably. And as far as he goes, in my dealings with him as Governor of Bank of England, seeing him around London, I would say he's a very someone who is well aware of his own abilities, but at the same time, very charming. I don't think his charm will go very far with Donald Trump, but if it comes to standing up to America, he looks like a credible international figure for Canada.
Vicky, give me your impression of Mark Carney then, once a governor of banks, now a world leader.
Well, the first thing to say is, of course, that he's an economist, which is a real asset, I would guess. Of course, you could say that I'm slightly biased. The other is that he was actually, while here, pretty willing to challenge the authorities. So he was obviously pro-Remain. He didn't like the Brexit implications. I mean, the Bank of England had to step in quite significantly to support the markets, put a lot of money in. So he was prepared to speak his mind, which didn't always make him, you know, a real favourite with the government. But nevertheless, he was. So he's quite tough at the same time. So this toughness that he has shown right now is something, obviously, that Canada needs at present. And given the unpredictability of President Trump, he's going to need to be tough over a period of time and to be a tough negotiator. And we do know that Trump actually values tough negotiators rather than people who just, well, perhaps Zelensky didn't quite negotiate tough enough. But certainly the style of Carney is probably just what Canada needs right now.
Tony, we're seeing fighting talk from Canadians. I mean, you guys are not going to roll over and let Donald Trump have his way. If there is a trade war, it's gloves off and Canada's up for the fight.
Well, listen, I just want to make a couple of points because I'm living and breathing within the Canadian dynamics. And Mark Carney surrounded himself with a lot of Trudeau's army. And Mark Carney has also been very vocal in his book Values and his stance to be very connected to World Economic Forum and a very strong environmental, basically landlock our oil, landlock our resources. So I would question how quickly Canada is going to embrace that, because after 10 years of Trudeau's group of the billions of dollars that people are wondering, how did we spend it and where did it go? For Carney not to distance himself from that says he's actually part of the same machine. He's been advising Justin Trudeau for 5 years. He's been a very big part of Canada's political scene for 5 years. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, what is his stance? He's willing now to move to eliminate our carbon tax and all the things that conservatives have been screaming for. Is it short term? Is it a platform to get elected? Or is he in fact going to go against everything he's believed in for the last 10 years, that carbon is bad and we have to sequester it in the ground? The last thing you'd say is, are we up for the challenge against America? I mean, here's the reality of it is, this is our biggest trading partner by far. And all the slogans in the world won't change the fact that if Donald Trump turns off the faucet, our Canadian economy is going to be in a free fall. And we're going to have to decide as a country, what are we going to do to move forward? The silver lining is actually getting Canadians to realize we need to sell our oil. We need to look at our rare minerals, things that the previous government wanted to keep in the ground. We're really realizing these are important assets for us, for our future economy. So this is a really difficult time for Canada because you're dealing with the unpredictability of Trump, that uncertainty and insecurity, that the shifting sand that nobody wants to stand on. And then it's questioning whether Mark Carney or Pierre Poilievre, who is best to go in front of Donald Trump and say, can we do a deal talking about Fortress North America? Can we talk about securing our north, securing our borders? Can we work together on a deal versus what I consider to be an act of war is when Donald Trump comes out and says we should be the 51st state.
How offensive did you find that, Tony, as a Canadian?
Well, can you imagine Saudi Arabia showing up to the United States' door and saying, look, we'll take care of your $31 trillion of debt as long as you want to become part of the kingdom. By the way, Donald will make you a sheik. America would be absolutely up in arms if they showed up at your door at the same time and said, you know what, this little island called UK, we're almost ready to do a deal to take you on and let you become part of the state. And by the way, your prime minister could become a governor. That's how we react, of course, because we have an identity and we have sovereignty. But we also have people that are starting to realize that what are we going to do if we suddenly are left on our own means? We have spent 10 years seeing our productivity fall, our economy fall, the value of our dollar fall. I mean, the math, forget the rhetoric, forget what party you like for. The math is Canada is a much weaker country than it was 10 years ago, and we're not in a position to do a great fight. So we better start thinking about negotiating what's in it for Donald Trump. And what's in it for Donald Trump is he needs to have a fortress North America, and I would argue South America, and some of the allies outside of America as a position of strength to combat what we're seeing with China, what we're seeing with Russia and even India and all of their growing ambitions.
Thanks, Tony. Adam, just come in on that. Is that the way forward, that he sells that to Trump?
I mean, in a sense, that's giving Trump an awful lot of what he wants. If you talk about Fortress North America and, you know, throw in Greenland as well, the problem is that really involves the subjection of Canada to the United States. And, you know, it's all very well saying, well, we could get together. The truth is, right now, Donald Trump wants to screw the Canadians. He is trying to run down their metal industry, their aluminium and their steel to benefit American domestic production. That he is trying to demanding cheaper energy from Canada. So Canada's going to be impoverished that way just as well as if it confronts it. And I would simply say that actually in geopolitical terms, although Canada, of course, is a much smaller country than the United States, it's got incredible natural resources. It's got the second biggest landmass in the world. It has alliances around the world through NATO, through the Commonwealth, its relationship with Britain. I mean, I don't think the model of simply saying roll over, let's have Fortress North America is one that appears to appeal to a majority of Canadians. And indeed, that is the mistake which the Conservatives have made in having a kind of mini Trumpist Canada first position, which has backfired on them. Now they've discovered what America first means.
Tony, just come back in on that, please.
Well, I'm just curious how you guys I mean, I know you left the European Economic Union, but when you joined forces, was everybody subjecting themselves to a greater good? Or what's wrong with an economic union with your largest trading partner, a free trade agreement? What's looking at our rare minerals? China now controls 38% of the rare minerals in the world, 82% of the processing. America needs rare minerals. We have rare minerals. So what's wrong with
this is exactly the same argument as
talking about surrendering our sovereignty.
Well, you sound like to be honest, you sound like someone who in Ukraine who wants to do a deal with President Putin. It's the same argument.
Whoa, Tony, come back in on that.
Well, listen, I mean, I know you're an island and you think you're self-sufficient in the United Kingdom, but I would question, you probably do need partners to trade with. You need free enterprise. You need to have a free market. So I'm curious at how what's happened in Europe that suddenly, is it now the point everybody's going to go back and just be their own country? Or do you still see there's some value in countries working together and in trading, and in doing so, lifting each other's economy?
Let's get Vicky in. Vicky, what happens if the United States and Canada go at each other and it becomes a very bitter, acrimonious trade war? Economically, there will be no winners in this.
That's probably correct. But I think we need to remember, given what I've just been listening to, that there was a free trade agreement already. So in other words, Canada was part of this wider North American body, if you like, which included, of course, Mexico. Remember, we had an agreement before, which was the NAFTA agreement, which President Trump in his previous presidency decided to challenge. And there was a new agreement that was struck between the three countries, which actually more or less guaranteed free trade. So it was working quite well. So the question is really, why should Canada just sit there and accept a change in those terms of trade, which is really what President Trump wanted to do? And I've been looking at a lot of the comments that have been made by the government in Canada, and I have one here, which was from the Canadian industry minister for Carney, which is saying that really what Trump seems to want to do is to bring the Wild West to the factory floors. It is very disruptive what is going on, but I do want to say that a country that has an industry minister who is called François-Philippe Champagne, has a lot going for it, frankly.
Tony, just tell me, do you think Mark Carney will reach more towards Europe, the European Union, the United Kingdom, given all his experience and the contacts he has in this side of the world, if the relationship with Trump gets very difficult?
It's a massive wake-up call for Canada to be less reliant on one economy. And please, the one thing that Trump has done for us, and by the way, if you think I'm a fan of Trump, you're not listening well to what I'm saying. I don't like the fact that he's changing the agreement. He's got some issues with our border ports. He's got some issues with our Western ports and China control. But the reality is he's just using this as a means to try to extract a bounty on Canada. So definitely we need more markets. But we spent 10 years ignoring international markets. So to reach out and to start saying, we're going to replace American trade with world trade, and to think we can do that by waving a magic wand is just not possible. It's going to take years. And part of it's going to be we need east-west pipelines. We're sitting in the largest oil reserves on the planet, and the only people we sell it to is America at a deep discount. It's just stupid math. It's stupid economics. And it has a lot to do with the fact that we used to have very central governments in this country, left or right, conservatives or liberal, very little difference between the two. Now they're both pushing the fringes. The liberals have leaped over the NDP in terms of socialism, and the conservatives are trying to counter that. And what we've got is we've lost the middle ground. The middle ground is what Canada was built on: consensus, collaboration, working together. And we haven't seen that in quite a while. And so I hope all of this, whoever wins the election coming forward. The last point I want to make about Carney and his 88%, which everybody's screaming about, is that we also got to look at the math. The two of the candidates that were up for running, one of them, which had 100,000 votes and had raised $350,000, was just absolutely dismissed as a candidate, literally on television. She wasn't even informed until she was on TV. So I'm not sure that 88% would have been held. But regardless, Carney is definitely a great candidate compared to what we have. I'd love to see a great fair election between the two of them. But as a country, we got to start losing the ideology and start focusing on some ideas and policies that is going to grow our economy versus simply just keep borrowing money, hoping to keep the voters at bay. Because even Math 101, let alone an economics degree, knows that doesn't end well.
Adam, has Trump done Canada a favor here, sharpening their minds, making them perhaps diversify the economy away from the United States? And they've got Carney now, who has a lot of friends in Europe. King Charles in this country is hugely pro-Canada. We know that much.
Well, whether he's done Canada a favour or not, most people, I know that our guest disagrees, but most people would think that Canada was actually doing pretty well in the previous arrangement, which is now being torn up, which accepted, and we're all in favour, I think, of international trade here, accepted that the United States was Canada's biggest trading partner, and it was in a unique position to supply the United States, quite obviously, and that all seemed to be working quite well. What we've got is Donald Trump effectively saying, I want a bigger piece of our mutual pie. So it's not about cooperation. So in that sense, in material terms, he certainly hasn't done Canada a favor. Whether by making the upcoming election in Canada more competitive, with the possibility, as you say, of having someone of a more small L liberal persuasion to become the next Prime Minister, when it looks as if there was going to be a swing towards the right. I mean, that depends on where you stand in terms of politics.
Vicky, Trump has flip-flopped a lot lately on tariffs. What's the impact been on global markets?
Well, it's pretty bad because you can't invest with any certainty, of course. And what we've seen is that there are occasions when everyone moves the money out of the stock markets and into safer assets, such as government bonds, and then moves them out again. There have been some differences actually between sectors, because we've also had defense stocks doing rather well, particularly in Europe. Trump is actually withdrawing, or said he was withdrawing, but now he's coming back again to supporting Ukraine. So the markets have been seriously affected by this, and we've seen that all across the world. So it's not just the issue about what goes on in the US, but also what is happening in Asia, for example, what's happening in Europe. And that is very destabilizing. So how are we going to get out of this in terms of ensuring that there is some investment in the future, that we don't fall into recession? That's the big question that economists are now wondering, and they're also wondering about whether Trump actually cares about it. You would have thought that there would have been loads and loads of parts of the economy in the US which have been lobbying, if you like, President Trump saying that, don't put those tariffs on because it affects the car industry, for example. It affects all sorts of other sectors of the economy, but they don't actually seem to have had very much of an impact. But every now and then, what you see is tariffs are imposed, then they get withdrawn, or they're imposed double than they were before, then they're halved again. That is not a way in which you can conduct any trade negotiations to begin with, and B, you can conduct any sort of sensible economic policy for the country in which you are president.
Tony, how much potential has Canada got then if these pipelines are built and improved and you can get at all the energy and resources that you clearly have?
I mean, the expression is we could be trust fund babies. We have so much natural resources in this country. We've got water, potash, uranium, oil, rare minerals. We've got everything. There's no question why the United States wants this. The other thing we're not mentioning, which I think is important, it's 2 points actually. First is America has to repackage $15 trillion in debt this year, because when Biden was in power, they didn't lock that in as long-term debt. So he's got to hope the rest of the world is willing to take on some of that U.S. debt. Second thing is, you talk about Canada and, well, we shouldn't bend to our knees. I'll be interested to see how Europe and UK respond if Trump says you either put up 2% on your NATO or your GDP for NATO and buy our weaponry, or we're pulling out of the NATO. How would you react to that? I'm just curious. Would you think about continuing a fortress NATO and trying to work with the Americans, or just simply go, I'm going to put someone in that's going to have the toughness to say, screw you, Trump? And that's the issue you're dealing with. You're dealing with a very volatile president who sees America, has a vision, but at the same time, he's got one of the biggest economic problems we've seen in the world, which is this $31 trillion of debt, half of which is coming due this year. So you also got to think, as you're negotiating with them, this has got to happen. He wants interest rates lower. He's not worried about a recession. He wants his interest rates lower so he can put a smaller price on that debt. He's thinking tariffs is a way to help make money. All the stuff that economists would say is crazy. It doesn't work. But this is the blinders he has on. So when you're negotiating with someone like that, it's not a question if you have the pedigree or you have charm. The question is, can you meet them and understand what is really going on down there, and saying, can we be part of solving this problem versus having this war going on? And again, you have to understand, when America sneezes, Canada gets pneumonia. We're not talking about, you might have a lot of different trading partners trying to turn its back on you, or someone else you might be a lot better off. We are very dependent right now on the US economy. That has to change. It will change, but it's going to take a decade to change.
Adam, final point to you. It has been a whirlwind, breathless few weeks. President Trump has absolutely everyone dancing through his tune, Canada included.
Yeah, although I'd simply say I don't think he's quite as powerful as people might think they are, as you already pointed out, the debt problem you've already pointed out. I mean, you can have a vision of an America first, with or without Canada, where the rest of the world, go hang, and it doesn't really matter. But America is a long way from being able to achieve that position. So he is not going to get his way everywhere around the world. That's the truth of it. And yes, it might work for Canada economically if it just said, okay, we're going to be part of the United States, which appears to be the logic of the position that's been argued. But as things stand, what he wants to do is cut down American dependence on Canada. America is dependent on Canada for 80% of its aluminium. It's the largest supplier of steel. Trump doesn't like that. He's telling people in Ohio and Pennsylvania, I can take those jobs from Canada and I can bring them here, which can't be good news for Canada, whichever way you look at it.
No doubt we will talk about this again. The clock has beaten us. Adam, Tony and Vicky, thank you all so much for your insight on this one. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Just search for Roundtable TRT World. But for now, from me, Enda Brady, and all of the team here, goodbye and thank you for watching.